Good stories on there.
All right, so the YouTube should be starting. We're gonna record to the cloud. This is good. Sorry. Okay. YouTube is good. All right, welcome everyone to our next Water, Wetlands, and Watershed Seminar of Fall 2023. It's our 50th birthday of the Howard T. Odom Center for Wetlands. So we have alumni, and emerita, and all sorts of folks who have come through this room in one way or another, under the pressure of defending their thesis or their dissertation or teaching class, whatever it is. So today we're very lucky to have Erica Hernandez from Alachua Conservation Trust with us. Erica joined the ACT in the spring of 2019 after a fabulous year of camping in the Western US and Canada, which I don't know if you're going to show us any of that. No. She spent her career researching the flora and fauna across the state of Florida and earned her master's in interdisciplinary ecology here at the Center for Wetlands. I'm just going to read it, okay? So from deep interior swamps and estuarine ecosystems to sandhill and rare communities like Florida dry prairie, Erica loves to be neck deep in mud or crawling around salt meadow hammocks looking at Florida's rich ecological heritage. Erica has been a public servant. I think we have some pictures of that coming up here this weekend. Definitely neck deep in that isolated. Yeah. She's been serving state agencies or universities for over 20 years, often collaborating on complex projects requiring large stakeholder participation, and is currently working with a number of stakeholder groups to protect Florida's natural resources in a variety of ways, buying it, easements, planning with state, federal. You got a lot of money right now, so tell us all about how it's going, and thank you so much for coming to seminar.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. It's really nice to be here. It has been a while since I've been in this room. Wasn't under duress, but it was sweaty. There's some folks in this room who are on my committee. But it's really great to be here. This is going to be a really applied presentation because what I do is related to protecting conservation land. And so I have a background in ecology and in wetlands. I studied wetlands for years under these different auspices of grants and agencies and that sort of thing. And now I work for a nonprofit. So Alachua Conservation Trust is your local land trust. And we'll get into what that means because I'll talk about how that actual description doesn't necessarily resonate with people. What the heck is a land trust? But I am the conservation director, which means I'm in charge of acquisition. And so we do, let's get into it. So we were established in 1988. We've been around for a while. And our mission is to protect natural, historic, scenic, recreational resources in and around North Central Florida. And we protect land through purchase, donation, and conservation easements in 16 counties. So we work in North Central Florida, even though we were started in Alachua County back in the 80s. And so we have facilitated the protection of over 57,000 acres in Florida, including over 6,000 acres in conservation easements. So this means that we've protected private land by restricting deeds and keeping them in permanent conservation, even though they're privately held. And then we've also helped facilitate a lot of acquisitions for state agencies, for county agencies, for federal agencies, but we may not necessarily own that property anymore. But then we also have a lot of public preserves. So our mission is not just around buying and protecting land, but also about getting folks out into the land. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And we do have a professional staff of 19. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we went from kind of like a 2-person, 4-person shop to a really large staff with a lot of expertise and degrees. We used to be an organization where the board really had the knowledge and the capacity to inform the direction of the staff. And now really the staff is able to do a lot of autonomous work and bring it to the board and then ask for approval in terms of saying, like, does this meet with our mission and our programmatic goals for what we do. We are an accredited land trust, so there is an umbrella organization across the country that sets standards so that, there's a lot of ethics around protecting land and working with people. So we have a lot of rules to protect that and make sure that it is all done legally. We have a Florida statute that allows us to hold development rights on deeds. So we restrict land deeds and are able to restrict development rights for conservation. So all of this is embedded in statute. So we have a legal right to do that. And then we are a nonprofit organization. But we do a lot of other cool things. I think that Alachua Conservation Trust is a little different than some land trusts in that we have a really big outreach component of the work that we do, and education is so important to us. So we have some really neat programs. We have things that occur, monthly and weekly to get people out in the woods. We have special guest lectures. We have all kinds of events. But then we have some really neat programs that are grant funded that give opportunities to get children really engaged in nature and in conservation. So we have the Creek program, which is basically busing children in the 4th grade from Eastern Alachua County and Western Putnam County to have a field day in the woods in a learning lab environment. And that's funded by grants and volunteers. And then we also have our Young Leaders for Wild Florida, which I'm so proud of them. They are mostly high school students and young adults in college, and they kind of build their own program. ACT helps with the capacity. We drive, we help set up meetings and that sort of thing. But really, it's these young people deciding what they want to learn about, getting themselves to different types of in-situ environments where they can learn from professionals and climb in caves and learn about rare crayfish, or visit with a landowner or paddle on a river. And it's just really subversive 2-week kind of like summer camp that I wish I could go to sometimes, but it's really fun. And so it does provide this kind of training, and they've taken it to this next level where now they're kind of hosting their own nature events, trying to encourage other younger folks to participate in what they've learned as a young leader in conservation.
I don't know, that thing may be a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. And then a big part of our toolbox is we do a lot of restoration work. So we have a whole stewardship department that does efforts on our own preserves, where maybe we purchase something that requires a lot of fire or hardwood removal, or maybe the land has been abused a little bit and there are things that we can do. We work with a lot of partners to help us do restoration, especially if it's something related to some sort of engineering, replumbing type work. But then we also help a lot of private landowners and public agencies do restoration on their lands. And primarily that's going to be an exotic removal, planting longleaf pine, planting native species like wiregrass, and doing a lot of work with prescribed fire. And that can be everything from helping with site prep, developing a management plan, to actually on the day implementing fire. I'm already way off my notes. Who knows what I'm skipping over. And then we work a lot with other agencies, other organizations. So this is another really neat one that is a nonprofit, and it's called the Prescribed Burn Association. If you've never heard of them, it's volunteers. Some of them or most of them, I would say, own their own property that they're interested in managing, but maybe they don't have the tools or the know-how to just, light it on fire by themselves. And so this group of people works together to leverage resources to help each other burn their land. And eventually the idea is that they would get to a point where they could do it on their own with assistance and wouldn't necessarily need the hand-holding of an organization. So I had showed you that map of our 16 county areas, but this is probably a better representation of how and where we work, because so much of what we do is driven by opportunity. And that's going to be through grant initiatives. It's going to be through partner focuses. It's going to have a lot to do with where the funding is coming from, and who's coming to us and saying, we need help, this is important. And so at the top there, I have a picture of Dog Island. We actually do a lot of work in coastal areas across the state. We work in the Panhandle, we work in the Florida Keys. We have a grant with the Archie Carr Center for Sea Turtle Research right here at University of Florida to find innovative ways to protect private property for sea turtle habitat. We work in agricultural working land environments. We work with springs, we work with rivers. And so, this is the wetlands, watershed seminar. And so I wanted to kind of take that kind of big picture of what ACT does and put it under the lens of how we really integrated this idea of a systems approach to water and how that works with land protection in the areas where we work. And so I think that this really kind of started for us not that long ago. In 2019, one of my colleagues wrote a grant for a program called the Healthy Watershed Consortium. And it comes from funding from the EPA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and US Endowment for Forestry and Communities. So big federal funds, and it's a capacity grant. And the idea was you create this working partnership and you have a goal of protecting big acreages in a watershed that maybe still has a lot of opportunities for protection. And so for us, that was the Santa Fe River, which is a tributary of the Suwannee River and connects to the Gulf of Mexico. That is the northern boundary of Alachua County. And so, as I said, it supported staff capacity. So now we had this opportunity for an individual or a couple of individuals to really start planning the groundwork for how are we going to accomplish this massive goal. And it also helped us pay for things, food, workshops, materials to try and facilitate this outreach and this coalescing of potential projects. And so we had 39 partners, which is tremendous. We had regular project meetings, we had public meetings, and the idea was let's identify projects. Let's get everybody in the room to tell us what's most important to them and why. And what this kind of grant came from that idea of we were really limited by institutional capacity. If you can't afford to keep talent on your staff because your grants are really short, or you don't really have an operating budget to keep talent from moving on post-graduate school, it's really hard to build. And then the other idea that we came across was that this idea of conservation wasn't really didn't really resonate. I'm going to use this word a lot, resonate with private land when we started talking about the potential to protect land. And then the other big hurdle is financing. How do you buy it? There are really wealthy individuals out there who are able to take a big tax write-off and they want to donate, big tracts of land, and that's great. We love that, sure, give me 5,000 acres and, pay for the whole thing. But that's not usually a reality. And especially in our Central Florida, you have folks that maybe have been trying for a long time to hold on to land that maybe a few generations ago, there was a lot of it, and little by little it's getting sold off or taken away, or, they're just unable to pay for the taxes. Or maybe their families are moving away, they just don't really have a use for it anymore. So having some sort of compensation to help protect the land because you're restricting it and can't sell it anymore for houses, per se, which is more valuable than selling it for conservation. Trying to identify those resources was a big part of needing that capacity to go after grant funding, foundation funding. And so talking about the Santa Fe River and the Suwannee River, I'm going to kind of just talk about the Suwannee Valley in general. So this is the lower Suwannee watershed. And so this is a photograph of our little awesome preserve on the Santa Fe River. It's not yet open to the public, but will be soon. And this is Sawdust Springs, something that we purchased in 2020 on the Santa Fe River. This is the J.Y. Wilson Sandhill. It's in Columbia County. It's so gorgeous. It has wonderful species diversity. It's really well managed. And then these are two other properties that we work with. And so I don't know if it's surprising to you that we would also protect agricultural working lands, cattle fields. Essentially, this is Crumb's Cradle, which has a private conservation easement on it. And this is Little Orange Lake Overlook, which is one of the highest points in Marion County. It's kind of an iconic landmark on 441, just south of Micanopy and McIntosh. Has a little windmill. And just on a personal note, my husband's grandmother used to work in the packing house there. She used to pack oranges when she was a young woman living in McIntosh, which is super neat that we now own it and are protecting it. But so a lot of folks this doesn't really click with them, I thought that you're protecting wilderness, I thought you protect the woods, I thought you protect this. And actually, I would say that we have folks who love ACT, who have a real problem with this. And so our perspective is kind of goes back to this. Native sandhill, this is a longleaf pine dominated community. It is a grassland. Grasslands are some of the most imperiled communities in the world, really, and especially in the Southeast. And this very easily turns into that because it's high and dry. It's really easy to go ahead and turn into something else. And so this is what we realize is that we have a real problem with the messaging, with our partners, with the landowners, with our supporters. How do we get everybody on board for this big picture of how we're going to effectively protect watersheds? We have all these different types of projects with different types of land use, land cover, management, owners, perspectives. And so this is the Lower Swanee watershed. You can see in that bottom left-hand corner, the Swanee goes way up into Georgia. And so we have a little bit of the Middle Swanee and mostly the Lower Swanee, even though some folks call it the Upper Swanee. It's kind of like a pet peeve. And so we can see these, so, here's news.
Stick, yeah.
So here's Gainesville. And then actually the Alachua County boundary is the Santa Fe River here. What's really neat about Alachua County, and I actually learned this in Dr. Kaplan's class, is that, we have the Santa Fe River, and that's connected to the Gulf of Mexico. And then we have Haynes Prairie, and those are kind of like the big grounding water points for the county that are pretty recognizable if you're familiar with the area. Now, the Haynes Prairie watershed connects to the St. Johns River. It flows south, it connects to Orange Lake, and that kind of goes out to the Atlantic by flowing north into the St. Johns River. But also the Alachua Sink in Haynes Prairie connects via groundwater back to the Santa Fe River. So actually you have this really interesting configuration of where water goes in this area, which also affects a lot of political boundaries. You have water management districts that are split halfway through. And so this is a lot about all of these different types of stakeholders and stakeholder engagements that we have to do to be able to kind of frame the so what question, right? So I kind of want to relate this back to graduate school. I believe a lot of you are probably graduate students. This position, I worked in state government for a long time. I worked on grants for many years. I did all different types of work professionally, but this job, more than any job, reminds me of graduate school.
And undergraduates too, just so.
Oh, and undergraduates. Okay, well, if you decide to go to graduate school, I think working for a nonprofit is a lot like graduate school. You have to be autonomous. You have to go after information all the times. Everybody's telling you no. Everybody you work with you are not their priority, and you have to get their attention, and you have to sell that so what. And that's so much of what we do. And I would say that we all are eternal optimists because it's always the long view with all of these projects. I can't tell you how many times it seems like a project is just hit the garbage dump, dumpster fire, it's falling apart, they sold it, the person left the country. Unfortunately, sometimes people even, pass away before we can finish the deal. Sometimes it takes a really long time. And yeah, sometimes we still get there. It could take 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. It's really neat. So anyways, get back to this watershed. So we have our rivers, and then these little aqua dots, those are springs. So that was such an important part of this story. We have this really important kind of almost nationally, maybe internationally recognized resource here, which are our Florida springs. People come from all over the world. They're so gorgeous. And so there are things here that we can all relate to. And so in this land use map that you may not really be able to see, there's not a ton of development in terms of cities. It is a lot of rural land. They have a lot of agricultural land, some of it more intense than others. There's a lot of forest land. And then there's a lot of rural residential areas as well. And so I think it's no secret that we have a lot of people moving to Florida. Maybe they're moving to South Florida, and then maybe they realize that It's really uncomfortable to live on the coast. It's really expensive to live on the coast. Look at all this cheap land near springs. And so we have a lot of people moving up from South Florida, kind of buying that former sandhill, that old cow field, that former, silviculture area, pine area, and turning it into rat sheds and putting in septic tanks. So there is a lot of potential for conversion from these land uses that maybe aren't as attractive as protecting large tracts of wilderness area, but really are highly vulnerable to being converted to something else, which makes our work much harder. Like that is when it's lost, right? If it gets subdivided, that's it. And then we're done. There's not a lot of opportunity there anymore. So then we had to kind of decide, okay, like let's characterize what's here. We have the geophysical, we have the chemical connectivity, we have, surface waters and groundwaters. What else do we have? So we were communicating and focused on this part, right? Like the upper Santa Fe is really flashy, and then we have all this recharge area, the springs and the sandhill. That has a lot of implications for how the land is used. We have tools like basin action management plans. Want to make sure I said it right. I'm used to saying the acronym, which basically says like, hey, get your act together in terms of land use and your stormwater and nutrients hitting the system. So there are rules around that is complicated, but the idea is to reduce nitrogen for the most part. So how do we take like all of these connectivities and take it to the next level? And the next level is the stakeholders. They are part of the identity. And so who are our stakeholders? And what we wanted to do is make that identity around water. Maybe not everybody visits the springs or grew up next to a spring or paddles the Ichetucknee, but maybe they need to use the groundwater to water a field to feed their cows. Maybe, a commercial business in High Springs understands that they need tourists, or maybe, there are all these ways that we connect around water resources. So is that a topic that could resonate? Is that something that everybody can relate to? Can we form an identity around water? And then can we tailor that message around water so that it really gets somewhere with the people that we're trying to reach? So for me, the three main groups that we are focusing on are our funding partners. So those are like the other agencies. That's the state, that's the feds, that's the counties, the advocates. So those are usually other nonprofits that are adjacent to the works that we do, like our Santa Fe or the Springs Alliance, but they're not necessarily buying land, protecting land exactly the way that we do. And then there's the landowners themselves. And within these groups, there's lots of subgroups. Not all the landowners are the same people. Not all the nonprofits are, do the same thing, have the same mission. But those are kind of like the big ways that I can approach that. And so, again, kind of relating it back to graduate school, hopefully you're, or even undergraduate, because eventually like we're doing school so we can get jobs, right? And so the idea that you probably hear a lot, especially when you get to go to a conference or go to a workshop, is like, you must network. This is so important to the work that we do as well. And it's on different levels. It's, both in the agencies where if a board member or an environmental specialist or a permitter knows me well, then we can speak candidly about, the value of my project. Or we can talk about, have you talked to this person? Because I remember, 10 years ago, there was this real big issue with the well. There might be some legacy nutrients in the ground that you need to address. So that networking is really important. It's a little tricky because when we're trying to protect land, it's not something that we run around saying, I'm working with Mr. Smith and he's going to protect his land. That's a really good way to blow up your project, because maybe they haven't told everybody yet, or maybe they want to, we kind of wait till the ink dries. So there's this really fine dance of, I'm working in this area in Columbia County, and it's this really interesting project. And, we have to be, just have to approach things very, very carefully and be respectful of all the partners and what their interests are. But then there's this idea of willing sellers. And we do a tremendous amount of outreach, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But most of our or many times when we protect a property, that's when all of a sudden our phone is ringing off the hook. We're getting all these emails. Oh, I am the cousin of this person, or I live down the road, or this was my neighbor, and they saw that their land, that is adjacent to this other property could also maybe be protected. Maybe they talk to that person. So like that word of mouth is a really, really powerful tool, especially if somebody's had a good experience. If they've had a terrible experience and it was a slog and they felt like they got ripped off or something was misrepresented, that's really problematic. And so working with willing sellers is really important, because those people become your ambassador. So finding your ambassadors, your champions, the people who, they wanted to protect their property for the legacy of their family, or because their grandchildren want to be able to farm, or because they really care about the deer and the turkey, whatever that thing is that was most important to them. Let those folks be your ambassador so that they can share that story in a relatable way to other folks that you're trying to reach out to. And then when you're working with partners and you start building these relationships, it helps vet your project. If I'm really comfortable working with Water Management District and some of the federal agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they're like, oh yeah, that project's really great because it has gopher tortoises and it has this, then you start to elevate your projects. And it's not just ACT who don't they only work in Alachua County? It's not just them saying, hey, it's really important that we look at this property in Swanee. It's all these other folks that are saying this project is relevant, it's important, you should take a look at it, let's get out there, let's see it. And so I think you can maybe tell from these pictures, or maybe you can't because I haven't talked about it yet. So, here's the spring. This is Telford Spring. We acquired it a couple years ago, and then we were able to bargain sale it back to the state. So now it's owned by the Water Management District. And then this is a property that we own on a spring shed in Marion County. And then these are some watermelon fields up in Swanee County. And what do all these places have in common? Well, they're all connected. They're all connected through water. And we have all of these stakeholders who connect to these different types of land uses, land cover, and sometimes we can't even get them in the same room. Some water. I have been at meetings where some of the partners that we know really well are screaming about this right here. And then I've been at some of these meetings where some of our partners are talking about how they get blamed for everything and how, this community might be unyielding in terms of their ability to accept that this is a part of North Florida. And so now we're looking at, we have to work with all sides. We have to blend funding. We have to hold public meetings where people from all these different backgrounds and intentions and goals are working towards protecting the same property sometimes. And so it gets really complicated in terms of how do you do that? So if I am acquiring funding from a grant that is meant to restore a spring, and I am matching that with money that the intention is to protect agricultural land, you have to find some middle ground. And we don't do that by manipulating science, right? Like you have to do it by finding actual middle ground. And that's going to be through your partners and their data sets and their knowledge and finding ways to do things that are really creative. So one of the things that we focus on is de-intensification. So not only are we using tools that are going to restrict land use moving forward, but we're actually trying to make net benefits to water and nutrient reductions. And that's a little easier for folks to swallow in terms of protecting working lands. And so back to that stakeholder engagement and building an identity around the resource. And so we have land, water, and legacy, big power words in terms of acquisition and protection. So first off, does everybody relate to water and springs? If I get out there and I'm just talking about springs, maybe they've never visited the springs. Maybe they think springs is just for cave divers or, hippies. I don't know. So you have to think about, like, maybe it's really water. Maybe it's about your well. Maybe it's about, how much rain we got last year. Mimic jargon. So I know that probably doesn't sound great the way I wrote it up there, right? Because jargon is, kind of not a great word. Don't use it, right? But a lot of the agencies use it. And so if you don't know what their jargon is, and you're not using their jargon in a grant application or in conversation, your conversation's doing this. And I learned that the hard way many times. So let me give you lots of examples. So we were writing a huge application with a federal agency, and we were talking about recharge. I use that word, like, I don't know, 50 times a day in my normal life. And
So who here knows what recharge is?
well, yeah. So yeah, exactly. So
I talk about it a lot. I know you do.
right, we all talk about it.
Raise your hand if you know what the word recharge means.
Mhm. All right, so
Yeah.
that is not a unanimous, oh my God, we definitely know.
Just-
So, right, okay, so what we realized is we had this application, we've been working on it really hard. We set up this meeting so that we could be like, this is our application, do you think this is gonna be a good project? Should we continue on with our proposal? It's really nice that we had that opportunity to be able to discuss it. And they were like, no, this is garbage. We don't know what you're talking about. And we were like, how do you not know? It's so obvious. But the problem was that word recharge. And it wasn't used by this agency. And what I learned is, in particular, this federal agency, the people that work here in the state office are not from Florida. They move around. They take all types of appointments all over the country. And so when I'm talking about recharge and karst, which I'll get to in a minute, it just didn't matter. So you have to not just like wonder, I wonder if they know what this is, if I put it in here, you should just explain it, speak plainly. It's a process. Recharge is a process of rain coming out of the sky, hitting the ground, hitting the soil. Florida has really porous soil. We have a lot of unconfined areas. There's a lot of opportunity for that water to percolate through the soil and hit groundwater storage and the aquifer.
And now you know.
Now you know. But what that particular agency did know, what their jargon was, SWP. And SWP stands for source water protection. So I could talk about recharge. I could explain recharge. I can talk about how this region is really important to protect because it has high recharge value. And I needed to tie it up into source water protection, which is what actually resonated with them, which to them meant, oh, you mean you're protecting drinking water and water for cows and water for agricultural lands. And I was like, yes. So that's really important. So speaking plainly, I took, so I don't have a picture of it. Actually, this might be a picture of it, but there's a property we just closed on last month in Levy County. It is in the Rainbow River Spring Shed. It's been owned by a woman since the early 70s. She bought it, at a time when that part of Levy County was really wild and fast. And now she's surrounded by a lot of mobile homes and small homes and septic tanks and a lot of subdivision. And so we were able to help her identify some funding. But when we first applied, one of the first steps was we had to take the funding agency out to the property so that they could rank the project, right? So we spent 3 hours on foot, riding around in trucks, looking at Eastern indigo snakes, which is a federally protected species. And I was like, oh my goodness, like we're killing it. This project is singing. And I was just like, so excited. I had my A game on and I kept talking about karst, and how there are karst windows and karst chimneys and who knows what a karst feature is. Wow, even worse, maybe some. Okay, so in this particular area of Florida, we have a lot of limestone at the surface. And there isn't a lot of soil between that limestone and the aquifer. And specifically on this property, there were openings in the karst features where you're looking at the aquifer and you're looking at groundwater. And sometimes that's right at the surface. And sometimes it's in this kind of like chimney chute where you can look down and like, there's the water. And you're looking at groundwater. It's not groundwater. It's not water in a hole. It is the aquifer. So I've been talking about karst for 3 hours. And look at this karst and look at that karst and how beautiful is this over here? And after the 3 hours, this person who I was trying to get a lot of money from looked at me and says, "What's karst?" And I was, and again, I missed this opportunity to speak plainly, to say what I mean, to really speak the virtues of what I was trying to do, to make sure that what I was saying was really getting across, resonating, communicating. Be humble. So we go to a lot of public meetings. We have to represent our organization. Sometimes we're speaking to partners, sometimes we're speaking to the public. It depends. And there was a sister organization who we work with all the time. And they wanted to address this board to tell them thank you for being a partner on a huge grant that they had just applied for. So, and I really like this person. They're very charismatic, and he didn't read the room. And I don't think he'd ever been to one of these meetings before, so he wasn't really familiar with the culture of the space that he was presenting in. And so he got up there and he said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And one of the board members said, "So tell us about the project. What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, we're going to teach these farmers how to do best management practices and manage their properties better." And he kind of missed what he had just said. And I watched the board go, "You're going to teach our constituents who have been on their land for 200 years, who make a living on their properties, who know what they're doing, how to do their job?" And he kept going and he was talking about best management practices and all the other agency partners that were involved. And he was very excited and charismatic, but he'd lost them. They were like, "Who are you? You're not teaching anybody anything. Where'd you come from? Are you a farmer?" So you have to be skeptical of yourself. We learned a lot about being skeptical of everything when you're in school, right? And like applying a scientific method and applying a lot of logic. You have to be skeptical of yourself as well. How are you coming across? What are the words coming out of your mouth? Make sure you actually hear them, so that you can make sure that things resonate. Getting back to what is a land trust. So I talked about that we're a nonprofit and we have this legal statute that allows us to restrict deeds. That's not like an easy thing to just write in a postcard, right? And so how does what I do not look like a scam when I'm just like rolling on
Your land.
in a rural community and like, I'm not the government, but I'm going to help you get money and we're going to protect your land, especially in marginalized areas where people have been scammed out of their land, out of their rights, have lost property, have been really, not gotten a lot of resources that have gone their way. And in fact, there was a study done a couple of years ago by the Land Trust Alliance, which is the umbrella organization, where they use jargon from kind of our line of work to say like, what resonates, and nobody knew what a land trust was. So that's not really where we start anymore. We have to talk about what we do, how it works, and everything we do is about building trust. So this is an example of a postcard that we send out. So we have a lot of nonprofit tactics to try and, basically send something in the mail so someone doesn't just toss it out. So we try and send pretty postcard, handwritten messages. We make phone calls, we meet people in person, trying to connect. So this was a postcard that we sent out, and we realized really quickly that this guy was a problem because a lot of producers don't really like gopher tortoises. It makes their jobs harder. So we quickly switched that out with those guys. Most people really like sandhill cranes and don't take issue with them.
10 minutes.
But then we also have this one, which I saw was in Megan's office. John Moran has given us the rights to a lot of his imagery, which is so special that we get to use it. But this is a really nice one to have a Springs workshop because it's pretty, and they're going to stick it on the fridge and they might actually remember to go. All right, so tools for engaging stakeholders. Keep it simple, make it pretty. That was a really new concept for me coming from state government, where a lot of things that I did were just very, I don't know, practical and perfunctory. And we didn't have like the resources to like make something pretty, make it something that is fun. So much of what we get to do is about, isn't this fun? Isn't being outside fun? Isn't attending this thing fun? And so storytelling is such an important, part of it. So you can create your own content, personalize it to your audience, just like your resumes, right? You wouldn't give the same resume to a state agency as a nonprofit organization. You would tailor it. You have the same skills, but you're trying to present it in a way that connects, right? Same thing with our messaging. So we have to have these different versions. And then we want to share a relatable perspective. So that goes back to the way you speak, right? Making sure that you're not, talking about something that nobody knows what you're talking about. But it's also about your ambassadors. It's finding the folks that believe in what you believe in, but can also relate to the community that you're trying to work with. So I actually have like a group of landowners now that I got really close with, because we really went through it, trying to get money and grants and paperwork and legal things. It's very complicated to protect land. These are contractual legal transactions. It's not just like, I want to protect my land. Here you go. Great. Thank you. It's a nightmare. And so when folks have come out on the other side, I'm really glad they did it. Those are really good people to talk to landowners who are still on the fence, because our job is not to talk anybody into doing anything, right? Like, I'm not trying to convince someone to protect their land. It doesn't work that way. What we have to do is give them all the tools, all the information, and hold their hand so that we can help them through the process, help them feel supported, help them feel important, see why it's important. And so if you come out the other side from that experience, then you can really share that perspective and be like, you know what, this part was hard, but we got there, and maybe there's some advice, talk to this attorney, or make sure you get an accountant, or really think about your taxes. That's a different message coming from me than it is coming from somebody who's gone through it, who's a landowner who protected their property. And so around this time in the Healthy Watershed Grant, we got another grant called the Springs Tag Grant. And this is through the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. We have really cool license tags for the state, and there are proceeds that come from those. So one of them is for springs. And so we did a communication campaign where we were trying to identify the gaps in our ability to connect with stakeholders in terms of them understanding what we did and why it was important, and then creating tools to help bridge the gap. And so what came out of that were these really cool short films. We did 30-second films and 1-minute films. And initially we were just going to have them on our social media, and they went on YouTube. Then we got a grant from PBS, and they went on PBS. Then TV20 was like, oh, those are cool, we'll use them too. We got them all over the place. They got amplified. We put that content out there, and it just kept going and going and going. And people were calling, and they were like, oh, I saw you on TV. And so this is Jim. He owns property on the Santa Fe River, and I was going to show you a little 30-second clip of what we produced for this one grant. But this is something I always tell my staff, and it's good practice in general. When you're creating project-specific content, make sure it actually says what you need it to say, because once it leaves your hands, once it goes out your outbox, once you put it on a piece of paper, on a map, once you put it in a presentation, you may not ever get it back, and it might be the cornerstone of your project moving forward for everybody else. So if you're not sure about something, and this happened to me, I had a partner call and say, hey, I need you to write up something real fast for this project. Just, give me a rough estimate. It doesn't matter. I need it right now. And I was like, oh. And I did it. And then that piece of paper forever became the ask for that project. And I was like, but no, since then we got an appraisal, and since then we learned X, Y, and Z, and it didn't matter. That piece of paper became the ask moving forward. And so take your time, think critically about what you're sharing, put caveats around it, because you never know where it's going to go. So I'm gonna.
Escape out of there and see if we got about 5 minutes.
Oh, we got 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Okay, I'm not gonna show it.
Oh, 30 seconds.
So,
At the end, all right.
okay. So, engaging stakeholders. So, one of the things that we like to do is a lot of value added. And so it doesn't have to just be about money. What we are trying to do as we're trying to find the money is, can we help? Can we help write a management plan for your property? Can we bring a sister organization to go out and count your gopher tortoise burrows? Because you really need to know that. Can we help you burn your property? Can we get some partners out here? Do you need some restoration help? Would you like to host an event? There's all kinds of things that we can do that can help landowners feel connected to us. It helps with the relationship building. It helps them feel important. And it adds back to that idea of vetting and, having all of that greater support for the project from your sister organizations, from the agency. And sometimes there's roadblocks. So I learned that you can't assume a baseline with an agency just because they also work in water protection. Their baseline might be totally different. And they are, going to be entrenched in rules and staff interpretation of semantics of what they do and how it works. And you have to be super, super persistent. And so that idea of, how do you get something from someone from whom you are not the priority? That's something I actually ask in job interviews to work for us, because this is the reality. And so you have to be really persistent. You have to work within a bureaucracy, and you have to show your partners how there can be a way. Don't let this bog us down. This is in a place where we're at a full stop. Okay, well, let's try this. Let's pivot. Let's go this different route. And that's something that you have to just have a lot of initiation and gumption to go after. This is really important to us as an organization, access, and it's really powerful in telling the story of the so what. You can take someone and show them in person, in situ, how everything physically connects. You can stand on a piece of land and talk about how hard it was to acquire it. And they can look around and say, wow, I'm so happy you protected this. This is gorgeous. I'm loving being here. We invite guest speakers to come out to our properties because they might have an expertise and a perspective that connects better with our audience. And then I think that this is really important, is you have to figure out the barriers to participation, because it is on us to provide the access, to make that door wide open, to evaluate who's not present and why aren't they there and how can we get them there. So that might be giving someone a ride, changing the time of day, the day of the week. Do they feel comfortable in the setting? Is there representation there where they're not going to feel ostracized by who's attending? All these different types of things. And that's a question we have to constantly ask ourselves. And it's not just for the public, it's not just for stakeholders, it's also the agencies, the funders, the landowners, the rulemakers. We try and get everybody outside. And plus, that goes back to, it's fun, right? It's so fun. It's something that you remember. The paddle that I did with the head of the NRCS, we have that now. We can talk about it, we remember, and we can chat, we can learn from each other informally instead of, in this environment where we have, 10 minutes to make our pitch and then move on. So expanding from that initial grant, what we did was we started applying for absolutely everything. Now that we had capacity to identify projects and identify funding, we applied for everything. Money gets money. So we were able to amplify our efforts. We started getting National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grants. We got regional conservation partnerships, which I'll look at really quickly. Things where we can work on working lands for wildlife, projects to de-intensify agriculture, springs protection grants, state wildlife corridor efforts. It's really expanded our ability to have this greater presence on a big watershed landscape scale. And so regional conservation partnerships, I think where these kind of programs on a landscape scale connect is you have your partner programs. So we have programs that focus on working lands, habitat and species, source water, and that comes into this connection of landscape goals. And then you have organizations, you have federal programs, you have state conservation programs, local and nonprofit programs, again, they can connect on a landscape level. So where these come together is in the US Farm Bill, which is not nonpartisan support and billions of dollars. And so during this time, under the Healthy Watershed Grant, we applied to the Surface to Springs Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and were awarded $7 million. And then next year we got Forest to Gulf and got another $7 million. And what it does, it doesn't give ACT money for reimbursement programs, and most of those dollars go straight to landowners. And then we have to leverage those resources with partner funding. You have to have one-to-one match. And so really we have close to $30 million in this footprint where everybody's saying, yes, it's important to protect land. So all the stakeholders are at the table leveraging resources, because you can't do anything anymore with one pot of money. It's never enough. And then that's when you have to be able to have that landscape perspective of how do I tie together springs money and farming money and species habitat protection money and money to do prescribed fire. Where do all of these connect? And that's going to be at the landscape level, and how they connect to surface waters and groundwaters and the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. And so these are really cool grants because they are so big, and there's an opportunity to do a lot of outreach and advertisement and capacity building in terms of attracting attention to the resource.
Erica, we're at time, so just
Okay.
last pitch.
Two slides.
Yeah.
So just nonprofit work. This is the background of a lot of folks that work for us. I came here from a really different background. I've never worked for a nonprofit before. I never thought I would do such applied work. We have folks with forestry degrees and agro degrees, and we have attorneys working for us who are not actually practicing attorneys, but have that background, wildlife ecology. And that's it. And I just wanted to make a quick plug in terms of events. We have these walk and talks on Fridays, where if you wanted to come to one of our preserves, we have this like afternoon thing where you can just walk in the woods with someone who works with us and see one of our preserves. Very like low key now that the weather's a little nice. And then this Sunday is an event that we're all really proud of at the ACT Lodge, which is right off of the Hawthorne Bike Trail. We're going to have food trucks and music and lots of vendors, and then also just like really cool booths. And like last year I got to pet a tarantula, little art projects. It's super family friendly. People and have blankets, and we go on and it's just a really nice event. But if you're interested in what we do as your local land trust, check out our website, Alachua Conservation Trust.org. We have a lot of events. But the weather's nice. So check that out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Okay, so questions from YouTube, bring on. Otherwise, questions from the room about careers, about conservation. And I know some of you got to go to class, but we'll stay with Erica for a little bit here. Quietest group of students in seminar ever. You guys are winning the award this semester. Jackson, yes.
After your graduate career, did you ever feel like a pull to go into like academia or anything like that? And what made you want to go into the work? Because I sometimes feel a pull to academia, but then I hear like that little, sound in the back of my head, like if you leave now, it's gonna be hard to get back in. Like, is it worth it? And I go this route, like conservation.
I don't know if my answer is going to be that useful. I didn't want to go into academia. I didn't want to go into academia. I wanted to be able, I maybe had a non-traditional career where I jumped around in different fields, which just gave me a lot of flexibility in my career. And I knew that, academia, you got to fight for your position and you got to grind in. And I was a non-traditional graduate student, so I was already halfway into my career when I went to graduate school. So I just was kind of looking for something I hadn't done yet, and nonprofit work was that.
Well, having worked in agencies and nonprofits, obviously it's not an either or. There's pros and cons, but
And you have to work together.
yeah.
And
Do you feel like there's some major, I don't know, pithy lessons about where to get satisfaction from your work as an environmental scientist, an environmental advocate?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like my entire career prepared me for this job. And I'm so grateful for all the experience that I had, because I do feel like I can relate to the partners that I have in government. And sometimes there can be a lot of frustration in the nonprofit world. Not all nonprofits are the same. Some are huge institutions that have their own internal bureaucracies, but usually we tend to be more lithe, right? Like we can move faster. We can get, we can say things that maybe someone else would have to get through like 17 different people for permission, stuff like that. And so it took a long time to get used to that, actually. You'd be like, is it okay if I send this email to somebody else need to read it? It took a little while to start having that independence. And so I did really love in that transition, this idea of pivoting when you get a no, which is a little harder sometimes to do in a government or agency. I think a lot of times though, it has to do with the, the environment. Florida has not had the most embracing comfortable environment compared to agencies that are trying to be very. That certainly was my experience when I worked for some agencies. But it's also just, like the people that we work with in these agencies, like they're salt of the earth people, like they work so hard and they care so much too. And we just have like this different set of ground rules around what they're able to do.
Yeah. All right, well, let's give Erica another round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, we will see everyone next week for our next seminar, which is going to be, let's see who we have coming up next week. I should always pull this up ahead of time. Next week, we have Shannon McMorrow, another graduate from the program, Wetland Restoration and Agricultural